Welcome back to part 4 of SUNY Delhi's Hazard Communication and Right to Know training. In this section, we'll talk briefly about protecting the employees and labeling elements of hazardous chemicals on campus. Hierarchy of controls. When dealing with hazardous chemicals, this is almost like an assessment. We determined if we have to use, and then how to use, and finally, what do we need to use to protect ourselves while using. So your first is your engineering controls. First, if we can substitute a hazardous chemical with either a non-hazardous chemical or a chemical that poses less hazards. Elimination is ideal if we can perform the same duties without using those chemicals. We also have ventilation controls and enclosure controls. This includes chemical fume hoods. Administrative controls, work practices, and employee rotations. This includes the training, the specific training. And finally, your PPE or personal protective equipment. These are last resort because hazards still exist. We can't substitute everything. We can't eliminate everything. In those cases, we supply our employees with the personal protective equipment that's deemed appropriate for the hazards that they're handling. So how do we protect employees? We implement this effective program. We evaluate the chemical hazards in the workplace. We transmit this information to employees. And there's several elements of this hazard communication program training, which we're going over today. The written program, which is available, and this is basically a condensed version of that program. Your chemical lists, we'll touch on those in a second. Maintaining SDSs or safety data sheets, as well as labeling, are all elements of our hazard communication program. So developing a chemical list, we're going to evaluate the workplace and develop lists of hazardous chemicals products present. We also add to that list those hazardous chemicals that we produce in the workplace. These chemical lists will be maintained and will be in order by the product identifier. This is referenced on the safety data sheet. In basic terms, it means the name of the chemical that you're using. That's what I just spoke about as far as the product identifier. So labels. Labels now on ship containers will have the product identifier, the signal word, which is a danger or warning, a hazard statement followed by the pictogram or pictograms, a precautionary statement, and the name, address, and telephone number of the manufacturer, importer, or other responsible parties. Next, I have just a couple of newspaper clippings of some instances where and why that they've extensively rewritten the label policy. Bad things do happen. In this case, this was in Rome. A man died after drinking antifreeze. In this case, it was in a soft drink bottle with no proper labeling. He was rushed to the hospital, but ultimately this man passed away. Which shows the importance of labeling and the importance of having all those label elements so you're aware of what you're handling. Another instance, this was in Little Rock, Arkansas, where at a daycare, a staff member mistook Kool-Aid or wiper fluid for Kool-Aid and placed it in the refrigerator. Several of the children drank the wiper fluid. In this case, everyone was okay. There was some hospitalization, but another instance of where and why labeling is important. And just a picture, probably what happened in the first clipping that we discussed. The soft drink on the left or a vitamin water. The fluid inside is similar to the fluid inside of the bottle on the right. It's a soft drink bottle, or at least it looks very similar to a soft drink bottle. In this case, somebody wrote "do not drink" on the side. It's barely visible. So you can see how this could be easily confused and put you in a potentially bad position. So in order to prevent these, we have the elements of a label. Your first is your signal word. Again, these are danger or warning, and they indicate the relative level of severity of a hazard. They alert the reader to a potential hazard on the label. Danger is used for your more severe hazards, while warning is used for your less severe. Your hazard statement describes the nature of the hazards, including where appropriate the degree of the hazard. Toxic if inhaled, causes severe burns and eye damage. Extremely flammable liquid. Next, you'll have your pictogram. There's 9 pictograms, all of which we've gone over except for one, I believe. Your first is your health hazards. Again, this is the human silhouette with a star on the chest. Your flame hazards, which is a flame over a bar. Exclamation mark hazards. Again, these are your irritants, and it's just an exclamation mark. Gas cylinders or gases under pressure. Corrosion. These have the hand at the bar with the test tubes pouring a substance on top of them. Your exploding bomb hazards. Oxidizers, or the flame over circle. And environment. This is one we haven't touched on. These are aquatic toxicity hazards. The pictogram itself is, again, the red diamond with what looks to be a dead tree in the background and a fish laying on a rock. Again, probably a dead fish. Handling, proper disposal is important with these hazards. We don't want to dump them down the drain, which will find its way to our waterways. Reference the SDS sheets on these chemicals for proper storage, handling, and disposal. The last one is your skull and crossbones, your acute toxicities, your poisons, basically. Precautionary statements. These describe the recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to a hazardous chemical or improper storage and handling. This includes prevention, response, storage, and disposal. Label allocation. C44 is a skin corrosion irritation chemical. It would have a hazard category 2, a signal word of warning, a statement of causes skin irritation, followed by a pictogram. In this case, it would be an exclamation mark hazard. Flammable liquids. They have other categories 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the more severe. Signal words of danger for categories 1 and 2. Your statements are extremely or highly flammable liquid and vapors. Your category 3 has a signal word of warning with a flammable liquid and vapor hazard statement. All 3 of these would still have the flame pictogram. Next, we have an example of a label. HS85 is your product identifier, followed by your signal word of warning in this case, and your hazard pictogram, which in this case is the exclamation mark hazard. You'll have your hazard statement, followed by a precautionary statement, and finally, you'll have your supplier information at the bottom, including a number to call. This is a sample label. Again, this would be for a secondary label. So in the case where you or students or staff members are removing a chemical from its original container that came from the manufacturer and placing it in what's called a secondary container. In those cases, we have secondary labeling. The elements that you'll see on these, we try to keep consistent, including a product identifier, supplier information, precautionary statements, signal words, pictograms, and hazard statements. This is a template that we can use. Workplace labeling, I just went over these. Employers shall ensure that each container of hazardous chemical in the workplace is labeled, tagged, or marked with either the information specified under paragraph F1I, we just went over that, or product identifier and words, pictures, symbols, or combination thereof, which provide at least general information regarding the hazards of the chemicals, and which, in conjunction with other information available, i.e. SDSs, to employees under the Hazard Communication Program, will provide employees with the specific information regarding the physical and health hazards of the hazardous chemical. Just a warning: when using the HMIS system, it's the number allocated to the hazard. Its severity is actually opposite that of GHS, and what I mean by that is in GHS, 1 is your more severe hazards. When using the hazardous material identification system, it's the opposite, where 4 would be your severe hazards, as opposed to 1 with a GHS standard.